Welcome to the official trailer of Positive Voices. I'm Leah Henry.
I'm Malachi Stewart.
And we are super excited because this podcast is well overdue. We are super, super excited because, listen, we're sharing stories and we're talking about HIV. And I think this conversation is super important. And I think we both have interesting perspectives to give this podcast. You know, we're going to be talking about aging with HIV. We're going to be talking about self-care. We're talking about dating. We're talking about disclosure. We're talking about everything under the spectrum because we need to have real conversations. And I thought it was important that we both share, you know, kind of where we stand and why we decided to do this podcast in the first place. So, you know, Malachi, I know you have a story that I think a lot of people need to understand in order to empathize with, you know, how you attach to these stories. So share, I would love to hear.
Yeah, so, I mean, HIV work, period, has always just been something that's like personal for me. I was diagnosed in 2008, December 2008. We'll never forget it. And I just remember at that time, 14 years ago, oh my God, I'm still a young 30.
You don't look like what you've been through.
You know, I'm still out here looking good in these streets. I remember just at the time, like, the system failed me. Like, I didn't get connected to the resources I needed to be connected to. But more importantly, I was not educated. Yeah. And there was no face of it. At the time, there was nobody who I could look at and say, oh, this is a person living with HIV, thriving with HIV. This is what HIV looks like over time. So every subject that we're going to talk about on the show is subject that I needed to hear about. And I just remember like being 20 years old at that time, waiting a couple of months for my birthday and telling my mother, like literally my conversation as I disclosed to her was, Mom, if I can just make it to 21, because that's when the insurance will pay out the full amount. I wasn't nowhere near about to die. That was not nowhere near, as you see me here 14 years later, that was nowhere near in the trajectory. And it wasn't even at that time something that needed to be thought, but my miseducation, because of stigma, I just didn't have it and no one came in and gave it. And so it's important for me in this project to not only share my story, but to let other people share their story, because even as a person working in the community, there's this same narrative. There's this same script everyone's reading from. It's a bit of a monotony. And so I wanted to break that. And like, let's hear the real stories of people who really live this, who really work in this field. And yeah, that's why it's really important to me. Positive voices, speaking. But I'm interested in your story because I remember when we first connected, I was like, oh my God, we're so like diametrically opposed. And yet it works, right?
Yeah.
What made you interested?
Yeah, no, for me, I just think there's a lot of miseducation. You know what I mean? I think that, over the course of the last few years, we've seen that sexually transmitted diseases have spiked significantly. Not just HIV, but, I think we all know everyone is having sex, right? But there's like not these conversations about some of the repercussions behind sex, but also, HIV in general, to your point, there's really no face. And now we are talking about it and now more people are seeing it. But again, I don't see this like strong representation of like people who are standing and is like, I'm living with HIV other than Magic Johnson, which half the time I think about him as kind of like a living experiment when I think about it, because it's like, oh, he has all the medicine that's going to keep him alive. Again, stigma and misinformation because people don't talk about it enough and it's not discussed enough. And again, I have friends that are having sex, right? And so I want people that I love and people that, are a part of my following, I work in media, to know the information and stop being so ignorant about what's out there, what can help people. And then also these conversations help people be honest. You know what I mean? The reason we don't talk about it is because people are so scared to say that I'm living with HIV. And the reality is it's more people than you think. Probably someone that you know, but when this opportunity came to me, I realized like I don't know anybody personally in my own circle, my family, my friends who has HIV. Statistically speaking, there has to be at least one. And no, I don't know anybody. So what does that say about like how we don't have conversations about this? And I think like that's the whole point of this podcast. You are a person living with HIV and I'm a person who is negative, but I think that bringing those two stories together to tell other stories is why it's so important to have a podcast like this, because there are so many different dimensions. I think that, to your point, we are so different, but in the same way. And I think that like sharing stories and perspectives and hearing all parts of the spectrum is so important to like continuing the conversation, right? Because when we discuss things, we're not going to always agree, right? There's just like, there's so many different elements and spectrums to the conversations, but I think it's so important that, you know, there's a representation of everybody when we're talking about educating ourselves. And for me, honestly, this is an education journey. I don't find it okay for everyone to be so ignorant about like the human condition in general, because the reality is even if you are negative and you're listening to this, again, you probably do know somebody who does have HIV. And so I think the more that we dive into this space where we get to learn more and educate ourselves, we better the human condition, period.
Absolutely. How important is it for you to represent Black women on this podcast? Knowing that, I think a few weeks ago, there was an article that released, and it said, Black women, the new face of the epidemic. That, I had a lot of emotions about that. I had a lot of feels about that. We've talked about this before. I've always said that for me, Black women have been a safe space.
Yeah.
Particularly as a Black queer man who is femme, like that has always been a safe space and community. Most of us, the first person we told was a Black woman, the first person, you know, that we felt like we could confide in. And so to see that's being named as the new face of the epidemic, and then have you coming onto this show admitting like, hey, I didn't know a lot about this. This is not something that we talk about. How important is that for you?
Yeah, I just think that there's, again, room to grow. There's room to understand. There's room to be educated. And ideally, you know, I'm learning so much through being a part of this podcast. And that's my hope for the people who are listening to this that are negative, right? Like, again, you might not be living with HIV, but this can affect you. This can also be something for you to expand your mind on. So again, I think that Black women, you know, we have a responsibility because we're number 2 most affected by this.
Yes, it's so, statistically behind like Black men,
right.
Black men who have sex with men,
right,
would be Black women.
Black women, and so again, there's a story to be told, and there's more information to be known because I don't think many people know that. And so again, this podcast is really about expanding our minds. And one thing I will say, being a part of this podcast, Malachi, honestly, y'all got a lot of acronyms, okay? I don't know what half this stuff means. So when I say education, we're giving education. So real quick, before we go, I need some acronyms real quick. I need you to tell me some things because we got to get our people caught up who don't know, like me, before we even get into the episodes. So people have like a little guide. So give me some of the main ones that are might be heard throughout this podcast.
Okay, so you're going to hear us use terms like cisgendered. Cisgendered refers to people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Okay. So if you were assigned female at birth, you identify as female, cisgendered. I was assigned male at birth. I identify as male, cisgendered. Transgendered, exactly what trans means. So y'all caught that. And those trans, you want to follow what follows it. So there can be trans non-binary, people can be a trans woman. What would that mean? That trans man. So sort of like those terms being used in that way. MSM, you may hear us use that. That is men who have sex with men. We use that term and people rebuke this a lot. Listen, that's important to know because we don't police people's identities. Yeah. However you identify, gay, queer, that's your business. However, that is a more scientific term. So we just are looking at who you have sex with. You can be straight, you can be gay, you could be whatever, but we're looking at who you have sex with. And that's also, again, just referring to the gender assigned at birth or sex assigned at birth. So I'm trying to think, was there any other terms that we use that you might not, that may have caused pause? I'm
trying to think, like, because you say them so quick. I'm like,
yes, and you keep me checked because as a person who works in the field, a lot of people who are affected or the faces of people who are affected are people who work in the field. Yeah. So we're talking to each other so much that we forget. You remind me that there's still so much work to be done. That there's still so many people who don't know that what I think is normalized is not normalized conversation. Yeah. And even hearing you like stop and say like, what does that term mean? I'm like, you you know what, we got to do better. Like, let me make sure that we're actually taking the time and slowing down and educating. But for any terms that people are watching, if you don't understand the terms, we do have a dictionary. We do have a bit of a dictionary on our site at dcnshiv.org/podcast. So if you go there, you'll be able to not only get plugged in with resources, not only be able to do the survey. Please complete the survey because that's how we connect with you. That's how we know if we're doing a good job. That's how we know if we're on subject that you want to talk about. But you'll also be able to see a bit of a dictionary there to kind of explain terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And also make sure you use the hashtag because Positive Voices, because we want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking, and give me to tea, okay? I can go through your hashtags and find out all I need to know about, the vocabulary, okay? I feel like at the end of the season, I should do like a pop quiz. But I feel like I might fail.
We should do a pop quiz.
I feel like I might fail. I don't know. We'll see. You know what?
Maybe we'll do like a live show or something. We have to
you
do
know
like
what?
a pop quiz.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Like, give me together. Yeah.
What have you learned?
Yes, give me together. Anyway, listen, there's a full season ahead. There's so much to learn. There's so much to do and talk about. So we hope you will sit with us through this next season of Positive Voices, and we have so much in store. So get ready.